This is Words Aptly Spoken, which comes from Proverbs 25:11. A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver. The written word is a precious treasure. We want to preserve written knowledge for God's glory and as an anchor to the history of the church and its classical conversations. We hope to encourage the reading of words and of the word.
So welcome to Words Aptly Spoken, where Jennifer Courtney, Timothy Knotts, and I discuss books from the Classical Conversations curated curriculum. Today is Wednesday, September 4th, 2024, and I'm Lee Bortons. And today we're being joined by Lisa Bailey and Kelly Will. Both help us with curriculum development and Classical Conversations. Jennifer Courtney has the day off, so welcome you two.
Thanks, Lee. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely.
Good. This will be fun. So Tim, tell us about this month's shows and themes, and then we'll move in more specifically to the book of the week.
Yeah, thanks, Lee. Most of the time we spend time talking about books that are in our curriculum that our students read. But this month we're beginning a series exploring some helpful parent resources that we have that we recommend and are available at the Classical Conversations bookstore. Today we're going to be discussing Dominic OBrien's book, How to Develop a Brilliant Memory. That might be a little bit scary for some people who know they don't have a great memory, but this is a good book to help you out, not to make you feel guilty, I think. Later in the month, we'll talk about some other really good books, including The Paideia of God by Doug Wilson, and another family favorite for many families around here, especially those beginning their homeschool journey or who just need a reminder of where they've come from, Echo and Celebration by our very own Lee Bortons.
Great, thanks for sharing that with us, Tim. And just we want our listeners to know you can access all of our past episodes as well as upcoming calendars and past calendars at both at Lee Bortons, my YouTube channel, and leebortons.com. Where we also have links to our sponsor, classicalconversationsbooks.com, and the books discussed on Words Aptly Spoken can be purchased there. And we're just real grateful that as busy as all of us are in helping write curriculum for the Classical Conversations communities, that CC also thinks it's worthwhile for us to discuss the books with one another. So thanks, team, for joining me. Okay, team, Tim, let's get started.
Well, usually, yeah. Both is true, both the team and Tim. Usually Jennifer will ask you why this book is in the curriculum, but since we're not talking about a curricular book today, I'll ask it a little differently. Why is How to Develop a Brilliant Memory a recommended resource for CC families, Lee?
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons. So first, every generation, actually the person, has to start over with their knowledge. Nobody's born with all that knowledge just wired into their head. And so we need to teach our young folks how to learn, and it's a skill anybody can learn. Or memorization is a skill anybody can learn. And Ben Franklin tells us that experience is a dear, meaning an expensive teacher. So we try to have in our CC curriculum for parents books that will give them tips, tricks, and shortcuts, as well as inspiration to doing things well within the classical model. So this book falls into that category. One of the reasons I picked this book, because there's lots of books out there, is Dominic OBrien's story itself, which I won't give everything away, but he did not begin as a memory master, and then neither did any of us, and neither do any of the students in our foundations program that end up becoming memory masters. So he just accomplished so much once he put his mind into it. So I just thought that it was a really good resource. It has a lot of different tips, more than anybody will ever use that I know of. So hopefully there's one or two that each person can cling to and then just get some inspiration from the other books. But brain training is really an important part of what we're doing in the classical education model. This book was born out of the same time period as some other books, like How to Teach a Baby to Read or Why Johnny Can't Read, because there's this big argument over memorizing whole words versus memorizing phonics, and which is easier and which gives you the boost towards all words. So that's, of course, why we have students memorize phonics. So right from the beginning, there's your education, there's a use. We also are in a time period where technology is almost stealing some of our brain power. Now that's true too back from as soon as books were printed, the printing press and were available to everybody. Nobody needed to memorize those long stories, and no wonder they were in poetic form. That's easier to memorize. So that's one of the tricks and tips that you can learn. But all technologies make us weaker in some area, they may strengthen us in another. And so I know I'm old enough to remember when I had hundreds of 7-digit phone numbers memorized.
Oh,
And I
yes.
never needed someone to tell me, give me a map of my local community, because I walked, biked, and drove all through it. And those are kind of things that have been lost now, thanks to cell phones and to GPS. So we have our own challenges with each generation, trying to learn the skills of memorizing. And then, of course, calculators taught us you don't need to memorize your math facts. So we have some current recent heresies to overcome, as well as acknowledging that there are just skills anybody can learn. And so this book will help those who want to learn how to memorize. And then, of course, we as Christians, it's demanded of us to hide God's word in our heart. So anything we can do to help us know him better and to make him known just seems like a good resource to spend some time and money with.
That's a couple really good things you highlighted in there, Lee. Thanks for sharing your heart for this with us. What you're saying about technology stealing our brain power, I mean, that goes all the way back. Plato complained about that, right, with the invention of the written word. He thought that that was stealing our memory from us. So that goes a long way back, that idea. So you also referenced that this has something to do with Memory Master. So this book is sometimes known among some circles around here as the little book that launched Memory Master for Classical Conversations Foundations program. The author, Dominic OBrien, has won the World Memory Championship 8 times. That's not something that I was particularly familiar with before I encountered this book for the first time. But Kelly, maybe can you tell us a little bit more about Mr. OBrien and why he wrote this book and what this whole World Memory Championship thing is?
Absolutely. So the first thing I'm going to do is introduce a word of the day. And Dominic OBrien refers to himself as a mnemonist, which is basically someone who's able to perform unusual feats of memory. So we want our foundation students to be mnemonists when they're memorizing their foundation's memory work. But he is the author of over 3 dozen by now memory-related books. He is, like you said, the 8-time world memory champion, and currently he is the senior world memory champion. And Lee has already alluded to this. He would not deem himself a natural memorizer. He actually was inspired to begin learning mnemonic techniques when he saw someone on TV memorize a pack of 52 playing cards in less than 3 minutes. And so in order to be able to memorize numbers, he created a mnemonic system called the Dominic system, which is actually in our How to Develop a Brilliant Memory book. He currently gives lectures and he's on television quite often speaking about the power of memory. His work is based on this simple message to train your memory, as Lee said, and increase your brain power, to train your working memory and increase your fluid or functional intelligence, and to stay fit, mentally fit, no matter what your age. So an interesting fact about Mr. OBrien that I found was that he has an entry in the Guinness Book of World Records. On May 1st, 2002, he committed to memory, get this, a random sequence of 2,808 playing cards, 54 packs of cards, after looking at each card only once. He was able to correctly recite the order, be inspired potential Memory Master students, making only 8 errors, and 4 of them he immediately corrected because he realized that he was wrong. And so it's incredible what God has designed our minds to be able to memorize, as Lee said, to commit his word to memory. It inspires me to know that these things, we're capable of these things, that he's designed us to commit so much information to memory. And the World Memory Championships, if you have an opportunity to look them up, are actually quite fascinating. There are, I believe, either 10 or 12 different disciplines that competitors are tested in, including the ability to recall names and faces, or strings of binary numbers. It is really fascinating to see how they have developed this competition just to be able to, first of all, have fun, and secondly, to test the limits of what they're able to do. So Mr. O'Brien he is quite an inspiring individual, not only an inspiring author.
Wow.
I want to give, before we move on, something unusual. Kelly, I want to give Kelly some kudos. She's helped me run the National Memory Master competition for classical conversation students for about a half dozen years now. And she does an excellent job of encouraging the children, win or lose, stumbling or not. Those kids work so hard.
Yes.
And she makes sure every one of them feels like they have won their event. So thanks for your hard work there, Kelly.
Absolutely, Lee. It's a joy.
Yeah. So for the ancient Greeks, the muses, right, were those deities that inspired men and women to great things in poetry and in music, also in storytelling. And their mother was Mnemosyne. So mnemonic devices come from her name, from the memory. And I love it that in the Memory Master competition, the way that you get in is to write that story, right? To take all those memory facts and put them together into something that's a unified whole that you've created. And that's very musical in the ancient Greek sense. So that's a beautiful thing. But speaking of which, memorizing certainly has a lot to do with what our Foundations kids do. If you've been either in a CC community or visited a Foundations community before, you see a lot of kids working hard at memorizing things. And it's one of our 5 core habits, those great skills that we practice all the way through our education. But on the other end, the 5 canons of rhetoric, we have memoria. So Lisa, can you talk to us a little bit about why is memory such an important thing that we practice it not only in those first 5 core habits, but also all the way up to the end, from Foundations to Challenge and beyond?
Yeah. I love that you brought out the fact that memorizing is one of the 5 core habits that lets us tap into what we're learning, but it's also one of the 5 canons that helps us as we get ready to present or arrange or elocute what we have learned. And so the cool thing is that memory really starts with, what do you know? What do you already know? And it's a perfect place to start with our little kids, who, you know what, love to tell you all the things that they know and all the things that they're seeing. But that is a great starting place. Lee said, we're not born with all this knowledge. We don't come like preloaded like a computer does. Okay. But I do think that we come wired with a thirst for knowledge and a curiosity. And that's what I see. I'm hyper excited about this right now because I have a 2-year-old grandson who is frankly curious about everything. And he is so amazing to me because he wants to tell me what he knows, but then he is really interested in acquiring new information. And he is constantly asking me questions, and he really wants to know the answer. And he will look at me so intently, and sometimes he will stare at me and he will say, again. And he wants me to say the same thing again. He is embedding it in his memory. And then he'll go along for a few minutes, and then he'll turn around and he'll say, talk about windmills again, or talk about shade again. He is embedding it. He's like, he is pounding that peg in. And so memorizing is what our children do as they make sense of the world. They are curious and they're taking in all of this information, and they want to know all this stuff. And they're so good at memorizing. So we give them, our naturally curious kids, lots of things to memorize, not just so they'll stop asking us questions, but because we want to help them build a storehouse of knowledge. And to me, I can remember being a child loving to know things. And it's like that storehouse becomes your treasure chest. And you store it up, not just to have it, but to play with it whenever you want to. So the foundational knowledge, the things that our children memorize, or like a treasure chest that they can open whenever they want to play in it, or whenever they find a new jewel to add to the chest. And I can see them categorizing all the red jewels are over here and all the blue jewels. And this is blue and green. I'll put it in the middle. And so memorizing is so important for our little children as they're building knowledge that's going to help them make sense of their world. But it's important for our growing and our older children too. I can remember speaking at practicums, reminding parents that memorizing the grammar of a new subject does not stop when your children go to challenge. They just stop being as happy about it. They don't like to memorize as much. And grown-ups, our brains are we've let them get a little brittle, so they're not as fluid and as plastic unless we're practicing some of these tips from how to develop a brilliant memory. It's important for our older students to have things memorized because that's when they begin to make the connections. That's when they begin to build a context for richer ideas or more complex ideas and relationships. And so all of that memory work can come flooding back to them. And I have seen it as a challenge tutor. I can remember students kind of letting their eyes go unfocused for a minute, and then they'll say, that's like a reference to what we did, what we memorized. That's like from the foundation's memory work. And I had a student one year who just said, man, is everything you talk about today going to be a reference? And it made me laugh. And then it made me realize, oh, you know what? Everything we talk about ever is a reference. We just don't always know what it's referring to. We've not made all the connections we could, but because we live in a universe, everything is a reference to everything else. And a brilliant memory will help you access more of that.
Yeah, I'd like to, can you write your 2-year-old? So I got a question for you, and you guys had kids, so you can still answer this, but I think it's really interesting how the younger you are, the more predominantly taste and smell are how you memorize. And people will talk about, even as adults, how smells are something that triggers a lot of memoria, things that happened to you in the past. And so it made me think about people who travel and live in different environments and or are super observant to the area that they're in. So whether you're a foodie or a sommelier drinking wine, or you love taking a walk and you go, this place smells like Pennsylvania. Like, I think people who are adults who pay attention use taste and smell more than they even acknowledge or know. What do you think?
I think that's really true. I had not considered that, but so many of now that I'm considering it, so many of my deep-seated memories that come back to me every year at certain times are connected with things I have smelled or tasted. I mean, there is a smell, there is a host of memories that come back to me when I smell freshly mowed grass. Yeah, I think that's true. And it makes me wonder if we're doing something with our kids that we really want them to remember. Maybe we need to have a strong smell or something to taste associated with it. I'm going to write that down and try that the next time Gideon comes.
Feed them the right snack all the time while you're trying to teach them so they remember things. I think there's something about melodies too, Lee. Not necessarily words, though those often go along with melody, but there's songs, there's music that lingers from our childhoods too, that sometimes we've lost the words to, but we hear a snippet of the melody and go, oh, I remember that. I know that. Or that reminds me of my grandmother.
Yeah, that's really true. Again, one thing that, I think people like to say is, well, I'm an adult and self-disciplined not to have to put everything in my mouth. And those people who do that end up maybe paying for it and dietary issues. But that made me think about how online, because we can't smell or taste online or touch, there's no way online education can be as influential and build the memoria the same way live education does. And the experience of being with people that you enjoy talking about things. And then I leapt to this thought that, oh, and words and images can be poisonous too. And we're less likely to tell people, don't look at that or don't listen to that.
Right.
We are to don't taste that. So anyway, lots of things. The memory helps you with memoria, the difference being when you're reflecting back on the things you've learned.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Well, let's take a quick break. So Lee, would you like to thank our sponsor?
Yeah, so one more time, let's thank classicalconversationsbooks.com, where the books discussed today and every week can be purchased. And we have both on leebortons.com and then at Lee Bortons on YouTube. The past episodes and calendars of what books were discussed when, as well as upcoming books. And on leebortons.com, there are links to them to the classicalconversationsbooks.com site. And something I've not been real good about saying about is when you get to the ccbooks.com site, lots of those places where we sell the books, there are book study guides or more tips or tricks or student assignments, various things that can help you to enjoy the literature and just the various materials that we study to become more classical and more Christian. So next week, one of my favorite authors of all time, because he's still alive and I can talk to him, Doug Wilson. I think maybe that's how I pick my favorites. My top 3 favorites are all living. So anyway, he wrote The Bidet of God, and he's been a guest on various podcasts I've done, as well as a big fan of CC, a great supporter of me back in 1997 when I got this going. So I look forward to our discussions with Doug through a book next week. So look forward to it, you guys. So Tim, what are we going to talk about now? Let's do these deep reads.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fun to have a conversation with an author through their book. It's sometimes even more fun to have a live conversation where they can answer your questions directly instead of making you dig for them in their text. So this book is a really different book from a lot of other books that we read. It's very, very practical, and it's also broken down into a lot of different parts. So in chapter 1 of this book, the author writes, memory depends on 3 basic processes: making something memorable, storing that item in your mind, and recalling it accurately at some future time. I do want to talk about some experiences you've had with those specific steps, but I think the very first one of those is really particularly interesting. Making something memorable. I think a lot of times we don't remember things because we don't make them memorable. So what does that maybe look like for you? How would you think about making something memorable?
I know for me, I'm not very good at remembering dates and even places, but I'm very good at remembering what people were there and what they said. And so it might be I don't practice the other skill enough, or it might be some of us are, like in all things, wired to focus on different things. Right. So the making something memorable for me is always who's there.
I think for me, I had to experiment a bit to find out what my brain's currency was. And it seems as if I make good memory connections with rhythm and with color. So I was always the kid who wanted to buy 5,000 colors of Post-it notes, had all the highlighters, and I could categorize information in my mind by color coding it. So I would highlight all the definitions, one particular color, which is very similar to our highlighting system that we promote for our challenge students to use. But it helped my brain to be able to remember because I was sorting. And it was easier for me to remember things in categories. And then rhythm has always been just clapping or chanting has always been helpful for me. I can remember times when, particularly in high school, when I was memorizing difficult definitions in chemistry or in physics, if I could apply a rhythm to it, my brain almost counted the cadence. And I could remember the words because I was thinking, I guess, Tim, in a sense, musically, of those, measures of words. So that was an easier way for me to be able to memorize. It's interesting, as an adult, I really don't rely on that as much as I probably could to memorize things like Bible verses and passages of scripture and things like that. That's something that I definitely need to put in my back pocket and pull out more often. Thinking about that for me. What about you, Lisa?
You know, we are a lot alike in that visual cues were really important for me. And my favorite math class of all time was a geometry class that I had when I was about in the 10th grade. And our teacher was really good. She was very classical. As I look back now, I realize she was very classical. And we were required to rewrite our notes from every class into a pristine notebook that we color coded. And so it helped me to, I mean, I was so fast at geometry proofs because all those theorems were memorized. They were color coded, and I had done some wild thing, but this color for this shape or this function. And so the color coding was really important to me. I'm interested as I play with my grandson and see what helps him memorize. It's his senses. And so I was saying he will sometimes say to me, talk about shade. And so we were outside, and we used the sense of feeling on his skin. And so he was just messing around one day, and he wanted me to play. And I said, well, I'm hot. And he didn't get it. And so I went and stood in the sun, and I said, look, the sun is touching me. The sun is shining. It is touching me. I'm hot. You come here and feel it. And then I said, and then I walked under a tree. I said, now I am in the shade. The sun is not touching me, and I am not hot. And so we went through permutations of that for like 20 minutes. And he still will say to his mom, she called me the other day, and she said, yes, we have to play the talk about shade game multiple times a day. But I really think it was his feeling. It was the feeling that is the sun, and that's hot. Oh, that's hot. So the other day when he was at my house, he walked past the stove when I was cooking, and he walked past, and then he turned back and he said, hot like the sun.
Mm.
And then he walked on, and I could hear him say, cool like the shade. And so, I mean, it was for him, it was senses. So
Yeah, that's good. I'm gonna give you something for you, Lisa. As far as I know, and I'm inviting any listener to put it in the comment box and challenge me, your shadow is the only actual 2D thing that exists in 3D space.
that's the coolest thing. I'm going to tell him that. He will find 2D, and then his mother will call me and say, why are you giving him these things to talk about? It makes my brain hurt. So that's cool. I like that.
Good. So, all right. So in chapter 1, a little bit farther on, O'Brien says he gives 3 practical tools or kinds of tools that help us to memorize things. The first one is association. I think maybe that's a little bit what we were just talking about, location and imagination. So he defines association. He gives a definition, which is always nice when an author helps us with the definition and doesn't leave us guessing. He says it's a mechanism or machine by which memory works. Kelly, will you read us exactly what he's talking about there so we can talk a little more about it?
Sure. Association is at the heart of developing a perfect memory. It is the mechanism by which memory works. The brain comprises billions of neurons or nerve cells that are connected together in a maze of pathways, allowing an infinite number of permutations of thoughts and memories. Therefore, it is feasible to suggest that any 2 thoughts, ideas, words, numbers, or objects can be linked easily, no matter how contrary their nature, and in a rich variety of ways. All you need to do is allow your thoughts to radiate freely. For example, how does your brain process the 2 objects, chalk and cheese? What do you associate with these words? Chalking a picture of cheese on a chalkboard? Prodding cheese with a stick of chalk to test its firmness? We tend to think of an object not by its dictionary definition, but rather by the notions which we associate with it. When I hear the word frog, I don't automatically compute a tailless, web-footed amphibian. Rather, I think of a pond, tadpoles, a scene from a fairy tale, footage from a TV nature documentary, and much more. When you see the word snow, you don't perceive it as atmospheric vapor frozen in crystalline form. More likely, you have personal associations, such as building your first snowman, a skiing holiday, a famous film, snowball fights, and so on, with so many possible associations and a vast network of interconnected brain cells to act as a conduit. For these linked thoughts, it is surely possible to find an association between any two sets of information. How would you link frog and snow together? A frog made of snow? A frog leaping through snow? A frog skiing? With just a little imagination, the permutations of links are endless.
And we'll play with that in just a minute. It's interesting, like Charlotte Mason calls education the art of relationship.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, with memorization and memoria being sort of bookends of some of what we do in our learning, woven throughout, is memorization and making these kinds of connections, is that really what learning is? And the more things we have to connect, right? The more pieces of information, the more things that we've got rattling around in our brains, the more educatable we are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's why I think people who speak two languages are, a leg up from us Americans, because the entire time they're speaking, they have the potential of always choosing between a synonym. What would that be in the other language, right? So I don't know if they really think that way intentionally, but they must think that way at least sometimes, versus I'm limited to just my own language. So I don't have nearly as many brain connections being made as someone who's multilingual. So I would think multi-experience, and look, all these examples he gave were so good. Is it an outdoor thing? Is it people? Is it color? Is it, the things you recommend, you guys said that you attach to? There's so many ways to make these associations and attachments, and the more ways we have of making them, the more neurons that are connecting. So I think you're stumbling on something there, Tim.
Tim, it also makes me wonder, when I think about our children, how imagination and play come naturally to them. And so thinking of these things that are seemingly isolated in their nature as being somehow hilariously connected comes easily to them. And it makes me think maybe we would be better memorizers if we would be willing to be a little bit silly from time to time, and to be able to let our brains out to play.
Yep.
And we didn't feel quite so isolated in the way that we categorize or we think of different subjects or different ideas.
They don't have any concept that these two things are not supposed to go together. They are just constantly looking for a relationship. And if one doesn't exist, to them, they'll make one. And
right. And it won't seem silly to them at all.
No.
They would drive it out by all of a sudden saying, if you can't, you're unsuccessful at that if there's not a textbook in front of you and a grade at the end.
Yeah, I don't.
Yep.
I don't
agree. All right. Well, so let's play a little. Let's try and let our brains out to play, as Kelly is admonishing us here. I'm gonna give you a couple words, and we're gonna make either recall some kind of association if you actually have one that is natural to you, and if not, let's try and make one up. So the first pair of words are trampoline and telephone.
I just think of how many young people I see as I even drive throughout wherever I am, laying on their trampolines with a cell phone in their hand or under it if they want shade.
That's so funny, because I thought, wow, I wouldn't have been able to use a trampoline when I was little if I was on the phone, unless the cord was very, very long. And so I have this picture in my mind of a trampoline and a phone cord that's 20 feet long, and I'm just holding the receiver going up and down.
Makes me wonder if I could memorize a phone number by imagining numbers jumping on a trampoline.
Oh,
Maybe as long as they jumped in a straight line, I guess, and not all over the place.
or you could jump like a clock. You could jump from number to number like the face of a clock.
There you go.
Oh,
Almost
like the
where,
old dials.
yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
it's almost where my mind went is I remember memorizing things like numbers by the action of jumping up and down and reciting the thing, right? Like,
Mhm.
here's my home phone number, and one digit at a time, and you're jumping.
Mhm.
So there's something
Mhm.
rhythmic, like Kelly, you're talking about that rhythm thing, and there is in that. To me, I remember memorizing things that way.
Yeah. My girls memorized for Memory Master by kicking the soccer ball against the house. So,
So the physical act, the touching, the actual physical
Yep.
aspect of it
Yep.
added to their hearing and sight.
Mm-hmm.
Good. All right, so here's a couple more words: brain and moon.
They both end with N and they're both nouns.
Well, think about the phases of the moon related to like the hemispheres of the brain, how the different parts of the brain do different things. And it makes me wonder if I could memorize the parts of the brain by thinking about, definitely know the phases of the moon better than the parts of the brain, but just to think, could it help me to memorize where certain things were located and to associate it with that particular phase? I don't know. I know a lot of foundations families, when they're memorizing the phases of the moon, they'll use Oreos and they'll have their children the center of the Oreo, which is probably, again, that association of taste. When they look at the moon in the night sky, they'll always think of Oreos.
Yes, that's true. It's a good point.
To me, this makes me think of the Middle Ages, when they thought that the moon had influence over some people's minds, right? And so we get the word lunatic.
Yes.
The moon improperly influencing someone's mind, their brain.
I think that's a true thing. It's being done right now. If you follow aviation, they're having to change the magnetic readings from the compasses on the runways. And I figure if the polar coordinates are changing that much from the magnetism and gravity, that all goes together, that's affecting airplane and animal patterns, it's probably making us a little nutty too.
Yeah. Well, if you ask a lot of elementary school teachers or ER nurses about the influence of the moon on children, they'll testify.
And on the birth of children. Yeah. I mean.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So we did a little association, not quite free association there, but some fun association. So the second tool of memory that O'Brien gives us is location, which is an interesting one. I don't think too many people who haven't done some kind of either study or practice with memory work would think about this, but he talks about it as making up the map of memory. So Lisa, will you read to us from this chapter?
Yeah. Location is the second key to a perfect memory. Locations make up the map of memory. They act as mental filing cabinets, providing a natural and efficient means of storing and retrieving memories. This is because we live in a three-dimensional world where objects can be located physically or mentally by where they reside or by following a set of predetermined coordinates. Location was first used as a memory tool more than 2,000 years ago. The ancient Greeks and later the Romans discovered that the best way to remember things was to impose order on them. They did this by choosing a series of places or loci which were already familiar to them. This could consist of rooms around the house, balconies, arches, statues, and so on. Images of what they wanted to recall would then be placed, or rather imagined, at these various loci. Location brings order to our lives, and without it, our lives would be in chaos. Imagine you were instructed to write down everything you've done today in order. Like me, you would probably start by retracing your steps, and you would most likely use the places you've traveled through to act as reference.
Great. So yeah, this is sometimes referred to as a memory palace. If you've read any
Mhm.
Sherlock Holmes, you will have definitely encountered that idea. Um, so can we talk for just a minute about how a foundations student or maybe even a challenge student would use this kind of geography to help memorize a speech or maybe a foundations presentation or a piece of poetry? Um, what way would we use to do this?
Well, I think, our challenge students frequently memorize long speeches, um, long Shakespeare speeches, for instance. And sometimes you memorize in pieces, but then you get the pieces mixed up and you can't, or they might have familiar or similar phrasing at different pieces. And then you start getting caught in this endless loop. I've said this phrase, was it the first time this phrase occurred or the second time this phrase occurred? And so I can remember with one of my daughters dividing what she needed to memorize, and she sat in a different place. So if I knew that there were things that were similar that were going to confound her on the order, you memorized it in a different spot. So this spot in your bedroom, and then you would move to the kitchen, or you would move to the patio, or you would move to the screen porch. And then you could keep it in order by where you would travel in the house. So that was helpful.
Tim, I have a fun story that associates with this, and that's also related to National Memory Master. 3 years ago, our winner was interviewed after the fact, and he was remarkable at reciting the timeline, not only frontwards, but backwards, and
Whoa.
even skip counting timeline events frontwards and backwards in different quantities. And so afterward, he was asked, well, how did you get so good at manipulating those timeline events in your mind? And he didn't have a memory palace, but we found out he did have a memory staircase. So his mom took all the classical acts and facts timeline history cards, attached them to the wall, leading all the way up their staircase. And for weeks, months, he practiced going up the stairs and reciting the timeline forwards and backwards coming down the stairs so that he knew it completely in entirety and could in his mind skip steps to be able to get to the next timeline event. And his mind was so fluid with the events, he could manipulate them in his mind with 100% accuracy. He didn't miss a single timeline event. And I just thought it was fascinating. He didn't have a palace, but he had a staircase. And it made
Yeah.
me think how many of our foundations families could utilize something as simple as
Mhm.
taking a walk in their neighborhood,
Mhm.
associating different pieces of memory work with a stop sign or with
Right.
the big oak tree in the neighbor's yard and
Yep.
various and sundry places around their own neighborhoods or their homes or even their bedrooms.
Mhm.
I know, I have read in history that there were some mnemonists, there's our word of the day again, who would even use their hands to be
Oh,
able to
yeah.
memorize in that way. So it's fascinating what you can use to be able to, as location, large or small, to help you be able to retain information. But I was just amazed when I heard his story of going up and down the stairs. Exercise and memory are a great combination. So it served him well.
That's
One
really
thing I
cool.
like about the classical model and memorization of memoria and how it's so inherently human, I always think my best example is all the golfers I meet who may or may not be the brightest candle in the collection, but boy, can they tell you at each of the 18 locations what they hit and score and where the ball went and what was good or
Mhm.
bad about it,
Mhm.
particularly if they've played the same course over and over again. So we know it's something everybody can do. We just don't always get the opportunity to practice it because nobody's shown us to practice it. So I hope that's what some of our listeners get out of this, that you can improve your
Mhm.
memory. Doesn't
Yeah.
matter.
Yeah, or they've made it memorable by getting a hole in one or chipping it in
Mhm.
or something, right?
Yep.
Um, yeah, well, one thing that I think about this a lot is the difference between having a physical copy of a book, a paper book in front of you, and a digital copy of a book where what page you're on or how wide it is or where you encounter something is sort of transitory. Whereas in a paper copy, I know when I'm looking for something that I thought was memorable, I can remember. So the
Which
top
part
left
of the page? Yeah.
part of the page, and I highlighted it blue, and it's about a quarter of the way through the book, and so I can flip and find it. Sometimes I even remember what the beginning of the line was.
Right.
There's that geographic relationship with the contents of the book that you can develop by attending to it well, and sometimes by multiple repetitions, and sometimes just by making it memorable in its physicality too.
Yeah.
Well, there is a third key to memory. It's imagination, but we're about out of time. So either you're going to have to imagine what that third tool is, or go on classicalconversationsbook.com and buy yourself a copy of Dominic OBrien's book and read about it, and encounter that challenge on your own.
Yeah, that'd be great. And something I'd like to end with is that if any of our listeners have another memory tool they want to share with us, or they have a testimony or story about a child who just did so much more than they thought they ever could, please share it in our comments section at Lee Borton's at the YouTube channel while you're listening to this, or after you listen to this. So thank you, everybody, and we will be back next week with the book. See, my memory's bad. I didn't write it down. What is our book next week? The Day of God, Doug Wilson.
Yeah.
It'll be very fun. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Lee.
Bye.